again. So, in the first video, we were talking about the amendments. Well, now we're going to talk about chapters 1 through 3, which basically cover the basics of what a government is and what the U.S. is. So, a government is a formal vehicle through which policies are made and affairs of states are conducted. So, basically, we make laws and we make trade, and there's trade and there's, hey, we're gonna, this state does this, like Florida does this, California does this, New York does this, and we all work together as one thing. And so there's different types of government. So there's a direct government, which is a system of government in which members of policy meet to discuss all policy decisions and then agree by the stuff. Basically, all those words mean, hey, we're all gonna get together, like every single person try to come together, and we're all gonna talk about what we're gonna do. Like, it was like Puritans. For that it worked because, hey, there was like 20 of them because, most people died from disease and Indians and whatnot. So they got together, they talked, they made up rules and whatnot, and they're like, hey, alright, we got this. But right now we're we can't even get our class to decide on stuff, like, for the people. How are you gonna get, the entire population of the U.S. to come together and all talk about what, it doesn't work. That's why we're not a direct democracy. We're an indirect democracy, which is basically, hey, you're gonna elect some representatives, and those representatives are gonna vote and do stuff and create laws and policies that hopefully is what you want, because that's the reason you voted for them, because they're the kind of people, and they like the kind of stuff, and are supporting the kind of stuff that you support. So talk. And we are specifically a republic, which is a government rooted in the Constitution. Basically, we're a democracy, but democracy is not a democracy. We're a republic. We're not a democratic type. We're not. Our government isn't a democracy. It's a republic, which has democracy in it. Just know that we vote for people. And then there's the unitary government, which is basically the local regional governments derive all their authority from the strong national government. So that basically is like, hey, we're like a republic, but instead of the people being in charge of the republic is, the government is. Which is kind of what we didn't want, which is why we are not a unitarian. And there's a confederation. And the confederation is a government that derives powers from the states. Which means that everyone's kind of separate, and there's no, power for the great, huge, federal government all put together, or the people. It's just kind of the in-between governments are hey, we're in charge, yeah. And then there's a federation, Star Trek Federation. National government and state governments share power to derive all authority from the people, and the powers of the government are specified in the Constitution. It's just kind of like us too. We have a Constitution, state and local governments and national governments share powers, and they get their power from. And then there's federalism. There's a term called federalism, which is very important. And there's whole lots of different types of federalism, which change over time according to the president and what was happening. For example, the first one you'll find out about is civil federalism, which is basically there's equal power between the different types of government, like national and state, but they're separate. They don't work together at all, which didn't really work out, which is why they moved on to progressive federalism, which is state officials are significant, and it kind of broadened the scope of the national government, and they kind of became friends. Then there's a cooperative federalism, which is like a marble cake. So think of dual federalism and regular federalism as kind of like pound cakes, like sheet, and then cooperative is like, we're gonna be a marble cake. We're gonna mix together and whoo. And then there's a new federalism, which is started by the Reagan administration. Reagan, that's awesome. And that's basically where Reagan was like, hey, we're too powerful. States, here's your power. you now we're equal and stuff, and you're not as less powerless as you were because now I gave you power, but we're so powerful, the national government. And then there's this thing called totalitarianism, which is not that fun. It's basically the power resides in the leader, and it's basically your dictator. It's Hitler and Stalin. It's not communism. It could be, but it's not necessarily communism, but it's basically dictatorship. Like Supreme Overlord Martinez. There's monarchy, which is, you should know, like kings and queens, like William and Mary. There's an oligarchy, which is basically where the right to participate is conditioned in the position of wealth and society status. Basically, it's kind of like a monarchy, but you don't have to be like hereditary king, queen. It's like whoever, depending on like how powerful and wealthy you are and whatnot, that's what determines you. Then there is, going back to historical stuff, the colonists came from England. They were fleeing because, there was the whole Anglican church, and there was the Puritans and Pilgrims who wanted to purify and fix the stupidity and craziness of the Anglican church that Henry created because he wanted to divorce his wife and whatnot. So they came over here from Europe, and they made settlements. And there's this whole religious issue, there's tolerance. There are people trying to be tolerant, like William Penn, Pennsylvania is named after William Penn, and he started the whole holy experiment thing, which is like acceptance of all religions, yay! Enlightenment, yay! Reason, yay! No more fear. Don't be like the Puritans and Pilgrims. Be enlightened. Be full of reason. Yes, acceptance. And then there's this really important term that you really should know. If you don't know this, like you should have learned this in English, you should have learned this like your whole life because it's so important to the economy. It's called mercantilism, and that's basically where an economic theory designed to increase a nation's wealth through the development of commercial industry and favorable balance of trade. So basically, how awesome your country is based on how much trade you get and how much wealth in the goods, how much your goods are worth that you trade to give the export and import. Like that's really important. Like if you have horrible, like if you don't have any trade or your items that you export or import are really, really sucky, then you're not an awesome country. Sorry. Then there's this other really, really important term that you really should know. It's called the social contract theory. And it's basically the belief that, people are free. They're born free. You should have all these, like, natural born rights. And you should, if you're going to have a government, like, they have to have your permission to govern you. Because you have all these rights. And they have to respect those rights. They can't just be like, hey, we're going to come take over. Oh, you have your church. I don't care about your rights. No, they can't do that. Which leads to an actual social contract, which is the actual contract of which people are like, hey, I'm gonna sign this and be like, hey, government, I give you the consent to be in charge of you. Okay, good. And then that, and a great example of that is the Mayflower Compact, which is where all the little pilgrims are like, hey, let's make up some rules before the boat hits some rock, and that's where we land. So they made up some rules, and the government, they were like, hey, this is our government now, yay! And then there's some more important stuff, like you should know that John and Locke and Hobbes were the ones that came up with the social contract theory. That's really important. Like John Locke was more like people should have rights, and Hobbes was like Leviathan. People are horrible. They need rules. They need to be governed. But John Locke was like, hey, chill, man. Like, yeah, they need to be governed, but they have rights, so they should give their consent to be governed. And then there's some more like history stuff that you really should know, which is from way back then, which is things that led up to how we became our own country. So there was something called the Stamp Act Congress, which is a meeting where 9 out of the 13 states met all up in NYC, New York City, in 1965, during which representatives drafted a document to send to the king listing below the rights he had violated. So they were like, hey, king, so this is all the stuff you did wrong, and all the stuff that you need to stop doing. Okay, good. I just want you to know. Just calling you out on it. And then there was these two really important conventions, which is the First and Second Continental Congress. So the first one was from 9/5 to 10/26/1774, which